For most of the second half of the 20th century, almost every casino in Las Vegas was built according to a set of rules written by one man, a consultant named Bill Friedman, who published an entire design philosophy in the 1990s built on a single premise. A gambler who cannot easily judge time, direction, or distance will gamble longer, and a gambler who gambles longer loses more money. Friedman's rules were specific and deliberate. Low ceilings to create a sense of enclosure. Dense, maze-like layouts of slot machines with no straight paths to anywhere, so that walking from the entrance to the restroom meant weaving through hundreds of machines whether you wanted to or not. No windows, anywhere, ever, on the gaming floor. And critically, no clocks, none, on any wall, above any bar, anywhere a gambler's eye might naturally land while playing. For decades, this was simply how a casino was built. An article of faith in the industry, backed by Friedman's own research showing casinos that followed his rules consistently outperformed ones that didn't. Then, in the late 1990s, a casino designer named Roger Thomas did something that should have been commercial suicide by every rule Friedman had established. Working for Steve Wynn on the Bellagio and later the Wynn Las Vegas, Thomas threw out the maze. He put in soaring ceilings, walls of natural light, wide open sightlines you could see clear across the casino floor, actual windows looking out at actual daylight. By Friedman's own theory, this should have tanked revenue, giving gamblers precisely the environmental cues, natural light shifting through the day, clear sightlines to the outside world that his entire philosophy was built around eliminating. Instead, the Bellagio and the Wynn became two of the highest grossing casino resorts on the planet. Something didn't fit. Either Friedman's theory was wrong, or there was something deeper going on that both approaches. The maze and the sunlit atrium were actually built around something that had never really been about clocks and windows specifically, but about a much older and much more manipulable piece of human psychology that both design philosophies, in completely different ways, had each learned to exploit. Here's what actually connects Bill Friedman's windowless maze and Roger Thomas's sunlit palace, and once you see it, you'll understand casino design as something closer to applied neuroscience than interior decorating. The goal was never really about hiding the clock. It was about controlling something psychologists call your temporal reference points, the external cues your brain relies on to track how much time has passed. And it turns out there are many different ways to disrupt that tracking, removing environmental cues entirely being only the crudest and earliest version. My name is Alex, and I spend a strange amount of time reading behavioral psychology research and, for this video specifically, actual casino design textbooks and gaming industry trade publications, which turned out to be a genuinely fascinating rabbit hole because the industry has been remarkably candid in its own internal literature about what it's actually trying to do to your brain the moment you walk onto a gaming floor. Here's what we're covering: the actual documented history of casino design philosophy, from Friedman's windowless maze to the deliberate reversal pioneered at the Bellagio and Wynn, and why both approaches were secretly chasing the same underlying goal. The specific psychological mechanism, first described by a psychologist studying pigeons in the 1950s, that makes slot machines one of the most effective behavior reinforcement tools ever accidentally discovered by science. The real function of free drinks, comps, and the entire rewards program system, which has almost nothing to do with generosity. The engineering behind the near miss, the specific, deliberately programmed slot machine outcome that feels like almost winning and keeps you playing longer than an honest random outcome ever would. And why casino chips exist as a form of currency in the first place. A design choice with a purpose far more specific than simple convenience. This isn't a video telling you gambling is evil or that you should never set foot in a casino. Plenty of people gamble recreationally, within limits they set and keep, and have a genuinely fun time doing it. This is a video about the actual mechanics of the environment you're gambling inside of, because once you understand what's actually been engineered around you, you can decide for yourself whether you're still having fun or whether the room has started making that decision for you. Picture being out on a boat far enough from shore that you can't see land in any direction. On solid ground, your brain constantly, unconsciously, tracks time and distance using landmarks. That building, that intersection, the sun's position relative to a street you recognize. Out on open water, all of that disappears at once. Time starts to feel strange, stretched or compressed, because your brain has lost the external reference points it normally uses without you ever noticing it was relying on them. A casino floor is built to be that open water, on purpose for as long as it can possibly keep you there. Whether the specific technique is Friedman's windowless maze or Thomas's atrium with no visible clock anywhere despite all the natural light, the underlying goal is identical: strip away your ability to reference an external anchor for how much time has actually passed, so that the internal sense of just a little longer never gets checked against reality. Let's talk about the actual research behind why removing time cues works as well as it does, because this isn't just an assumption casino designers made up. Psychologists have studied something called time perception distortion for decades, and one of the most consistent findings is that time estimation, how long you believe an activity has lasted, relies heavily on external environmental markers rather than some kind of accurate internal clock most people assume they have. Studies on time perception in windowless environments, originally conducted in unrelated contexts like submarine crews and Antarctic research station staff, found that without natural light cycles and other environmental time cues, subjects routinely and significantly misjudge elapsed time, sometimes underestimating hours-long stretches by a substantial margin. A casino floor recreates this exact condition deliberately: no natural light, no clocks, constant unchanging lighting, whether it's 2 in the afternoon or 4 in the morning, because that consistent, cue-free environment reliably produces the same time blindness effect in gamblers that researchers documented in submarine crews who'd been asked to do something completely different. Now, here's the part that resolves the apparent contradiction between Friedman's maze and Thomas's sunlit atrium, because on the surface, they look like opposite strategies achieving the same result by accident. They're not opposites at all once you look closely. Neither design ever put an actual, readable clock anywhere on the gaming floor, not the Bellagio, not the Wynn, not any major casino resort in Las Vegas, regardless of whether the ceiling was low and windowless or 40 feet high and made of glass. The Wynn's natural light comes through skylights and windows positioned so that while you can see daylight exists, you can't easily judge the specific time of day from the angle or intensity of that light, the way you naturally could outdoors, and there is still, deliberately, absolutely no clock visible anywhere near a gaming table or slot machine. Bank. Roger Thomas didn't reject Friedman's core insight about eliminating clocks. He rejected the specific idea that a maze-like, low-ceilinged, claustrophobic environment was the only way to achieve it. He discovered that an open, beautiful, naturally lit space could produce the exact same time blindness, while also making guests feel relaxed and pampered rather than disoriented and trapped, which turned out to be even more effective at extending play sessions, because a gambler who feels comfortable and unhurried in a beautiful environment sees no urgent reason to leave, while a gambler navigating Friedman's disorienting maze at least occasionally felt an instinctive discomfort that could cut a session short. Both design philosophies removed the clock. Thomas simply figured out you could do it without also making people feel like lab rats in a maze, and removing that subconscious discomfort turned out to keep people playing even longer. Let's talk about the free drinks, because this is one of the most visible and least understood parts of the entire system. Complimentary alcohol on a casino floor is not primarily a hospitality gesture, and it's not primarily about impairing judgment either, though impairment is a genuine, well-documented side effect that works in the house's favor. The primary function is pacing and retention. A cocktail waitress circulating regularly through a gaming area serves as a built-in reason to stay seated, to not get up, to not break the specific rhythm of play a gambler has settled into, because getting up to walk to a bar for a drink is itself a natural, external interruption to a gambling session, a moment where a player might glance at their chip stack, think about how long they've been sitting there, or simply decide they're done. Removing the need to get up removes that natural pause point entirely. Beyond that, alcohol's well-documented effects on judgment, reduced inhibition, reduced risk aversion, a subtly distorted sense of how much money is actually being wagered, all measurably increase both bet sizes and total session length in ways casinos have studied and optimized for extensively through their own player tracking data. The drinks are free because a free drink is cheaper, by a wide margin, than the additional money a relaxed, impairment-affected, uninterrupted gambler tends to wager over a longer session. This connects directly to the broader logic behind comps and player loyalty programs generally, which function on a principle worth understanding clearly. A casino's rewards program isn't measuring how much you enjoy visiting. It's measuring, with extraordinary precision, how much you're likely to lose over time and then returning a small, carefully calculated fraction of that projected loss back to you in the form of free rooms, meals, and show tickets because those comps keep you coming back to lose the rest. Modern player tracking cards feed data into systems that calculate what's sometimes called theoretical loss, an estimate of your expected loss based on your average bet size. The house edge of the specific game you're playing and your typical session length and comp offers are generated as a percentage of that theoretical figure, not as a percentage of what you actually won or lost on any given visit. A player who consistently loses more gets offered more free rooms and meals, not because the casino is being generous to a struggling customer, but because that player's theoretical loss projection justifies a larger marketing spend to keep them returning. The tiering structure most loyalty programs use adds another layer worth understanding on its own. Reaching a higher status tier, moving from a basic card to a mid-level or top-level status typically requires hitting a specific threshold of theoretical loss over a defined period, not a threshold of visits or hours played. This creates a subtle but real incentive for players chasing status to increase their bet size specifically to clear a tier threshold before an evaluation period ends. A behavior casino hosts are trained to recognize and, in many documented cases, actively encourage through targeted offers timed deliberately around tier deadlines, a free room offer that happens to arrive with 2 weeks left in a qualification period, worded in a way that gently signals how close a player is to the next tier. The status itself, the recognition, the shorter check-in line, the invitation to exclusive events carries genuine psychological value entirely separate from the material comps attached to it. And that status-seeking motivation has been shown in industry player behavior studies to reliably increase both bet size and session frequency among players motivated more by rank than by any specific reward. Now, let's talk about the single most powerful psychological mechanism operating inside a modern casino. And it has almost nothing to do with the physical environment at all. It's baked directly into the mathematics of the slot machine, and it traces back to research conducted in the 1950s by psychologist B.F. Skinner, who was not studying gambling at all. He was studying pigeons. Skinner discovered that if you reward a pigeon with food every single time it pecks a lever, the behavior is learned quickly but also abandoned quickly once the rewards stop. But if you reward the pigeon unpredictably, sometimes after 1 peck, sometimes after 20, on no fixed schedule, the pigeon can learn or predict something different happens. The behavior becomes extraordinarily resistant to stopping. The pigeon keeps pecking compulsively, far longer and far more intensely than under any predictable reward schedule, because the uncertainty itself becomes part of what's reinforcing the behavior. Skinner called this a variable ratio reinforcement schedule, and it remains, to this day, the single most effective, most addiction-prone reward pattern ever documented in behavioral psychology. More powerful than a fixed, predictable reward every single time. A slot machine is a variable ratio reinforcement schedule made physical, built with total precision around this exact research, whether or not any individual machine's designers ever cite Skinner directly. Payouts arrive on no predictable pattern, sometimes after 1 pull, sometimes after 200. And the machine's random number generator ensures no player, no matter how closely they track their own play, can identify any pattern to exploit, because there genuinely isn't one to find. This isn't a side effect of how slot machines happen to work. It's the specific, deliberately chosen design foundation the entire product is built on, because a fixed, predictable payout schedule would produce far less total playtime and far less total revenue than an unpredictable one, just as Skinner's pigeons demonstrated 70 years before a modern multi-line video slot machine was ever manufactured. Layered on top of the variable ratio schedule itself is something engineered even more precisely, called the near-miss effect. Modern slot machines are capable of displaying an outcome that looks, visually, like it came agonizingly close to a jackpot, 2 matching symbols and a third just 1 position away on the reel, even though, mechanically, the actual random number generator result was already a complete loss the instant it was determined, with the visual near-miss added afterward purely for its psychological effect on the player. Researchers studying gambling behavior, notably work led by researchers including Kevin Harrigan and Mike Dixon in Canada, have used functional brain imaging to show that a near miss activates reward related brain regions in a way that closely resembles an actual win, even though the outcome is, in every meaningful financial sense, identical to any other losing spin. This matters enormously because a slot machine programmed to display more near misses than pure random chance alone would produce is measurably more effective at extending play sessions than one displaying honestly random looking losses. And multiple jurisdictions have investigated directly and in some cases restricted the deliberate manipulation of near miss frequency because the psychological effect alone is powerful enough to function almost like a hidden additional lever independent of the machine's actual payout percentage. Let's talk about chips because this is a smaller mechanism but a real one, tied to a concept we've covered in a different context before, the psychological distance between spending and feeling like you've spent something. Cash has a physical, tactile weight to it. Handing over actual bills triggers what researchers call the pain of paying, a real, measurable, psychological discomfort that acts as a natural brake on spending. Casino chips exist to interrupt that exact connection. The moment cash gets converted into chips at a table, the physical object in your hand no longer looks or feels like money in the ordinary sense. It's a colored disc, an abstraction, closer in feel to a poker night with friends than to an actual financial transaction, even though the exact same dollar value is at stake. This abstraction measurably reduces the psychological friction associated with placing a bet, and it's precisely why casinos require you to convert cash into chips before playing table games at all, rather than simply allowing players to bet directly with cash, which remains, notably, how most casinos still let you play slot machines directly, since a slot machine's other mechanisms already handle the same psychological distancing function in a different way. Let's address a persistent myth directly, because it's worth separating fact from exaggeration here rather than repeating something unverified. A long-running rumor claims casinos pump extra oxygen into the gaming floor to keep gamblers more alert and awake for longer stretches. This particular claim has been investigated repeatedly by journalists and industry researchers, and no verified evidence has ever surfaced showing any casino actually does this. The logistics alone, filtering and distributing supplemental oxygen across an enormous open floor plan, would be enormous and would almost certainly leave a regulatory and engineering paper trail that has simply never turned up despite decades of people looking for it. But the rumor persists partly because something adjacent to it is completely real and well documented: scent marketing. Numerous casino properties have publicly acknowledged piping a specific custom-designed signature scent through their ventilation systems, a practice openly discussed in hospitality industry trade publications, with at least one well-known Las Vegas scent even developed into a retail candle and diffuser product sold to guests who wanted to recreate the smell of the casino floor in their own homes. Research on scent and consumer behavior has shown pleasant ambient scents can measurably increase time spent in a retail environment and even influence perceived generosity in slot machine payouts. Players in scented sections of test casino floors have, in published studies, wagered more than players in unscented control areas testing the identical machines. The oxygen story is fiction. The scent story is real, verified, and arguably a more interesting example of environmental psychology than the myth that overshadowed it. Sound design deserves its own mention here too, because it's engineered with a level of specificity most players never consciously register. Slot machine. Wind sounds are composed deliberately in major keys, the musical key associated across cultures with feelings of triumph and positivity, rather than the more ambiguous or minor key tones that might otherwise fit a random electronic chime. Even small wins, amounts smaller than the bet that produced them, meaning the player has technically still lost money on that spin, are frequently accompanied by celebratory sound design, cascading tones, simulated coin drop sounds that psychologically registers as a win regardless of the actual math underneath it. Researchers studying what's sometimes called losses disguised as wins have found that these sound cues measurably affect player perception of how well a session is going, with players in studies consistently misremembering their own win rate as higher than it actually was after sessions filled with this kind of audio reinforcement, purely because the celebratory sound created a stronger emotional impression than the actual, smaller than the bet payout amount displayed simultaneously on screen. The ambient noise floor of an entire casino, the overlapping chimes and jingles from hundreds of machines simultaneously, is not incidental background noise. It's a continuous, low-level signal suggesting that winning is happening constantly, all around you right now, regardless of what your own specific machine is actually paying out. Let me walk through a concrete scenario because seeing several of these mechanisms operate together on one person shows how they compound rather than working independently. A man we'll call Darius sits down at a slot machine at 8 in the evening with $200. He's decided before entering is his limit for the night. He's playing in a windowless section of the floor, no clock visible anywhere nearby, ambient lighting unchanged from when he walked in. A cocktail waitress brings him a drink within the first 20 minutes and another roughly every half hour after that, and he doesn't get up once because there's never a reason to. He hits several near misses in the first hour, 2 matching symbols with the third landing just above the pay line, each one producing a small jolt of anticipation, even though each one was, mechanically, a complete loss the moment it registered. He wins small amounts periodically, enough to keep him engaged under the exact variable ratio schedule Skinner documented, never enough to meaningfully offset his losses. When he finally checks his phone for an unrelated reason and sees the time, he's startled to discover it's 1:30 in the morning. Over 5 hours have passed, and he spent not the $200 he budgeted, but closer to $650, having fed additional cash into the machine twice without ever consciously deciding to abandon his original limit. Each top-up feeling, in the moment, like a small, reasonable continuation of a session that didn't feel like it had gone on nearly as long as it actually had. Now compare that to a different gambler, a woman we'll call Priya, who enjoys casino visits a few times a year and has developed a simple, deliberately mechanical system for managing the same environment Darius got caught inside of. Before walking onto the gaming floor, she sets a loud alarm on her phone for 90 minutes out and a second one for 3 hours out, treating the alarms as a hard external stopping point rather than a suggestion. She withdraws a fixed amount of cash from an ATM before ever touching a chip and leaves every card, debit, and credit locked in the hotel room safe, meaning there is no additional cash accessible to her on the floor, regardless of how the session is going or how she's feeling about continuing. She deliberately alternates a non-alcoholic drink with every alcoholic one the waitress brings, not out of any moral position on drinking, but as a specific tactic to slow her own rate of impairment, relative to the pacing the casino service model is designed to encourage. When her first alarm goes off, she does a genuine check. Is she still having fun? Is she within her budget? And she's found, consistently, across many trips, that this single external interruption is usually enough to reset her sense of elapsed time and make an honest decision about whether to keep playing, precisely because it substitutes an artificial time cue for all the ones the room itself has been engineered to remove. There's a third case worth adding because it comes from inside the industry rather than from a customer, and it illustrates how deliberately these systems are built rather than how they happen to affect people. A former casino floor manager, someone we'll refer to only by his role since he described this in an industry retrospective interview rather than under his own name, discussed how his property slot machine analytics team would review near-miss frequency settings and player session length data on a rolling basis, adjusting specific machine configurations, not the actual payout percentage, which is heavily regulated and audited, but the visual near-miss frequency in response to how session lengths trended on machines with different settings. He described this as standard, unremarkable practice within the industry, treated with the same operational seriousness as adjusting a restaurant's menu based on what dishes sell best. A detail that underscores something important: none of this is a conspiracy theory or an exaggeration. It's normal. Disclosed in industry trade, publications, standard operating procedure, refined continuously using the kind of data a modern casino's player tracking systems generate constantly. Let's talk about one more layer to this because it explains why the entire system has gotten measurably more sophisticated over the past 2 decades rather than staying static. Modern player tracking cards inserted into slot machines and used at table games feed an enormous, continuously updated stream of individual player data back to casino analytics systems. Average bet size, session length, time of day played, win and loss patterns, which games a specific player gravitates toward after a loss versus after a win. This data doesn't just inform comp offers, it increasingly informs real-time adjustments to marketing, and even within the bounds of what regulation permits, to game selection recommendations surfaced to a specific player through a rewards app or a host's personal outreach, a player whose data shows they tend to extend sessions significantly after receiving a small, unexpected comp, a free buffet, voucher pushed to their phone mid-session, for instance, will be more likely to receive that kind of intervention at the specific point in a session where the data suggests it's most effective at extending play. This is a fundamentally more precise, more individualized version of the same basic strategy Bill Friedman was pursuing with a windowless maze in the 1970s, using data rather than architecture as the primary tool, but chasing the identical underlying goal: extend the session, disrupt the moment where a player might otherwise stop and check the time. There's a 6-part protocol worth following if you gamble recreationally and want to keep it that way: fun, bounded, and actually within your own control rather than the room's. Rule 1. Set an external mechanical time limit before you ever sit down: a phone alarm, a wearable timer, something that interrupts you regardless of how engaged you are in the moment. Because the entire environment is built to prevent your own internal sense of elapsed time from doing this job reliably. And outsourcing the job to a device that doesn't care how you're feeling is the most reliable fix available. Rule 2. Withdraw a fixed amount of cash before you start and leave every card physically inaccessible, in a hotel safe or at home, because the moment additional funds are one tap away, the psychological barrier that's supposed to stop a session at your intended limit becomes trivially easy to cross without ever consciously deciding to abandon your original plan. Rule 3. Treat every free drink as a deliberate pacing tool rather than a friendly gesture, and consciously slow your own consumption relative to what's offered. Not for moral reasons, but because the entire comp system is calibrated around a level of impairment and continuous seeding that serves the house's interest in extending your session, not yours. Rule 4. Understand that a near miss on a slot machine carries zero informational value about whether a win is close or due, because the random number generator already determined a complete loss before the near miss visual was even displayed, and treating a string of near misses as a signal to keep playing is responding to a deliberately engineered illusion rather than to any real pattern in the game. Rule 5. Calculate your actual expected hourly cost of play honestly before sitting down, using the specific game's house edge and your typical bet size, because that number, not how much fun you're having in the moment, is the only reliable measure of what a session is actually costing you, and it's usually higher, sometimes dramatically higher, than most players estimate in their head. Rule 6. If you ever notice you've lost track of how long you've been playing, treat that specific moment not as a curiosity, but as the exact signal the entire room was engineered to produce, and use it as your cue to stop and check your actual status against your original plan. Because that disorientation isn't an accident or a personal failing, it's the intended outcome of a room built by people who have spent decades studying how to produce it in you specifically. One reframe matters more than the rest here. A casino floor is not a neutral space where you happen to gamble. It's one of the most carefully studied, continuously refined behavioral environments in all of consumer commerce, built by people who have read the same research on time, perception, operant conditioning, and the psychology of near misses that we've walked through in this video, and applied it with a level of precision that would be considered remarkable in almost any other industry. None of this means gambling itself is inherently harmful, or that casinos are uniquely evil compared to other industries that also use behavioral psychology to shape spending. It means the room is not a passive backdrop to your decisions. It is actively, continuously working to shape them. And the single most effective countermeasure available to you isn't willpower in the moment, since willpower is the one resource the entire environment is engineered to erode. It's structure you put in place before you ever walk in: an alarm, a fixed cash limit, a card left behind in a safe, external tools that don't care how the room makes you feel. Because that indifference is the one thing the room itself was never built to overcome. 3 takeaways. 1. The absence of clocks and windows on a casino floor isn't an aesthetic accident. It's a deliberate, decades-old design strategy rooted in real research on time perception, and even casinos that abandon Bill Friedman's windowless maze for open, naturally lit spaces still never put a readable clock anywhere near a gaming table or slot machine. 2. Slot machines are built directly on B.F. Skinner's variable ratio reinforcement research, the single most behaviorally persistent reward schedule ever documented, and near-miss outcomes are frequently engineered deliberately, independent of the actual payout percentage specifically to extend play. 3. Comps, free drinks, and loyalty rewards are calculated based on your projected losses, not your enjoyment. and function as pacing and retention tools first, generosity a distant second. Lazy investing built more fortune than chasing a jackpot ever will. The people who actually walk away from a casino floor in control of their night aren't the ones with the best luck or the strongest willpower in the moment. They're the ones who understood, before they ever sat down, exactly which parts of that willpower the room was built to quietly take away from them. If you want to see the exact house edge and expected loss calculator I use before ever sitting down at a table or machine, there's a walkthrough on my channel with the real math, no guesswork, just the numbers. Thanks for watching.